Oh, she was wicked. She was. I think there's no question about it.
Welcome to Watch Mojo. And today, we're looking at 20 disturbing but lesser-known cases of true crime.
26 years ago, this man murdered and ate a woman in Paris.
The Denver Spiderman.
Hello, Simpsons.
Hardy Ziff!
None other. I've been hiding in your attic, living off the moisture I can suck from the rafters.
Don't let the name fool you. This guy is no hero. Theodore Coneys was struggling, living in poverty, and suffering from poor health. In September of 1941, he went to visit an old acquaintance, Philip Peters, hoping to ask for help. Peters wasn't home, so Coneys simply moved into his attic and lived there for about 5 weeks, often sneaking out at night to get food. On October 17th, Coneys was discovered by Peters, and Coneys bludgeoned him to death in a panic. The following July, police were investigating the vacant house when they found the emaciated Coneys still living in the attic. He was sentenced to life and dubbed the Denver Spiderman, owing to his dark and reclusive lair. The Woodchipper Murder.
So that was Mrs. Lundegaard on the floor in there. And I guess that was your accomplice in the woodchipper.
You know the end of Fargo, when Peter Stormare put Steve Buscemi through a woodchipper? Yeah, that actually happened. Mother of 3, Helly Crafts, disappeared on November 19, 1986. Her unfaithful husband Richard told people that she went to visit her mother in Denmark, but this was quickly proven false. A plow driver soon reported suspicious activity involving a woodchipper near Lake Zor. And when police investigated, they found human remains, blue fibers matching Helly's nightgown, and a chainsaw with traces of blonde human hair. Richard received 50 years in prison, and the case became the first time in Connecticut history that a murder was convicted without a body.
Since the body was frozen, it produced little, if any, blood splatter. Most of the debris blew into the river. Only a few pieces fell short, landing on the bank.
The Icebox Murders.
My partner standing next to me made the comment that he thought that somebody had butchered a hog. We didn't know it was a body until we got ready to close the refrigerator.
To this day, the Icebox Murders are considered one of the weirdest unsolved cases in Texas history. On June 23, 1965, Houston police conducted a welfare check on the elderly Fred and Edwina Rogers after the couple had not been heard from in several days. Inside the house, they opened the refrigerator and found what remained of the couple. The house itself appeared clean and tidy, suggesting that the killer was highly methodical. The prime suspect was and remains the couple's adult son, Charles Rogers, who lived with them at the time. Police found blood in Charles's bedroom, but the man disappeared after the murders and was never found. The case remains officially unsolved, and Charles Rogers was declared legally dead in 1975.
I've never been able to understand how someone could commit an act like this and disappear off the face of the earth.
Amelia Dyer. Behold, one of the most notorious serial killers of Victorian England. Amelia Dyer initially worked as a nurse until she began baby farming, a common practice at the time, which saw women adopting babies for money. Usually they promised to raise and support them, but Dyer would, well, you know. It's unknown exactly how many, but estimates range from 6 to possibly 400 during a 20-year period. In the end, Dyer was tried for just one, but it was enough. She was found guilty and hanged at Newgate Prison on June 10, 1896. Luckily, Dyer's crimes led to widespread public outrage and spurred reforms in child protection laws and adoption procedures in the UK. The Walk of Death. One of the first mass shootings in modern American history occurred on September 6, 1949. 28-year-old Howard Unruh was a World War II veteran who reportedly showed signs of psychological trauma after returning home. He was a recluse, and he kept detailed notes on perceived slights from people in his neighborhood while developing a growing list of enemies. On that fateful September morning, Unruh unleashed his pent-up fury. In a span of just 12 minutes, Unruh embarked on a massacre throughout his Camden neighborhood, injuring 3 and killing 13. After his arrest, Unruh was declared criminally insane and committed to a mental institution, where he remained for the rest of his life. His attack later became known as the Walk of Death. Anatali Mosvven.
My granddaddy's buried here. Can we find out if anything happened to him?
Russian linguist and historian Anatali Mosvven had a lifelong interest in death and burial rituals. He was even known to walk 30 kilometers a day to visit various cemeteries around his home city in Nizhny Novgorod. In 2011, police came to the realization that someone had been exhuming bodies from these cemeteries, and their search took them to Mosvven's apartment. There, they found the mummified remains of 29 people. Mosvven had exhumed the bodies, turned them into mummies, then dressed them as dolls. His parents, who Mosvven actually lived with at the time, simply believed they were bizarre homemade dolls and not mummified corpses. He was found to suffer from paranoid schizophrenia and has been institutionalized ever since.
Calm down. Calm down, okay? Now.
Talking to a doll, baby.
Shh.
Mary Bell.
There was a feeling that the ordinary compassion or emotions of warmth towards the rest of the world were not there.
Britain's youngest female killer is Mary Bell, who committed her crimes in 1968 at the ages of 10 and 11. Mary had a deeply troubled childhood, growing up in an abusive and chaotic environment, with her mother allegedly trying to kill her on more than one occasion. So, in 1968, Bell killed 2 young victims in what psychologists believe was a misaimed act of exerting power and control in her life. Others believe that she was merely psychotic. Bell was eventually convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility and sentenced to indefinite detention. However, she was released in 1980 at the age of 23, granted legal anonymity, and had a family. She currently lives under a pseudonym in an unknown location.
She'd come out of it as a very balanced, sensible person and has sorted out her life with some ups and downs in it, and I think has become a very good citizen.
The Hart Brothers.
Walter Butler, king of the massacre. Big and Little Hart, robbers and murderers.
To see America's first documented serial killers, we have to go back to the late 18th century, when Micajah and Wiley Harp terrorized frontier Appalachia. After the American Revolution, the cousins became drifters and criminals, participating in banditry and possibly joining Native American raids. They eventually settled in the area of the Appalachian Mountains, killing innkeepers and settlers who were heading south. The Harps' crimes were exceptionally brutal, even by frontier standards. And while they did rob their victims, they often killed without motive. Though exact numbers are uncertain due to poor record keeping on the American frontier, they are believed to have killed between 40 and 50 people. Wiley was eventually caught, tried, and executed, while Micajah was violently murdered by a posse.
Now, who is that? That sounds like Byron Sampson.
Yeah.
Well, what would he want?
Eay Sagawa.
I don't want to kill, but I couldn't find any way to eat the girl's meat fresh, so I thought I have to kill.
How would you feel knowing that a cannibal was freely walking your streets? On June 11th, 1981, Japanese man Eay Sagawa murdered and cannibalized Dutch student Renee Hartvelt in his Paris apartment. He was then caught trying to dispose of her remains in various suitcases. Declared insane by French authorities, Sagawa was institutionalized but later extradited to Japan, where doctors found him sane. Thanks to a number of legal loopholes, Sagawa was never formally charged in Japan and was released in 1986. Sagawa lived freely until his death in 2022, profiting from his notoriety by writing a book about the murder and performing public speaking engagements. He even briefly worked as a food critic, which is grotesquely ironic given the nature of his crime.
He has never stood trial. Today, he walks the Tokyo streets a free man. A free man with an ongoing appetite for human flesh.
The soap maker of Coragia.
Here we are, hot out of the oven.
What is that?
It's praised. Have a little praised.
Is it really good?
So it's too good, at least.
Leonarda Cianciulli thought she was cursed. She endured a troubled childhood, and only 4 of her 17 pregnancies resulted in children. She then became deeply paranoid and resorted to crime, driven by a distorted belief that human sacrifices would protect her eldest son, Giuseppe, who was leaving to join the Italian army. Cianciulli proceeded to murder 3 women in her small town of Coragia. She also made soap from their remains and baked their blood into tea cakes. Both the soap and the cakes were given to friends and acquaintances around town. She openly confessed to the crimes and was sentenced to 30 years in prison, and she ultimately died in a psychiatric institution in 1970.
Soap. Sorry? I make and I sell soap.
The death of Sylvia Lychens.
The trial, they call this case the single worst crime perpetuated against an individual in Indiana's history.
Sylvia and Jenny Lychens were born to 2 carnival workers who regularly traveled around the country. During one of their parents' trips in 1965, the girls were left in the care of Gertrude Banishevsky, who agreed to house them for a weekly $20 payment. When this money began coming in late, Banishevsky took out her anger on the Lychens girls. Eventually, she directed the extreme abuse almost entirely at Sylvia, sometimes to the point of starvation.
Gertrude made her a prisoner. Gertrude encouraged others to physically abuse her, to emotionally abuse her, and she abused her.
Sylvia's maltreatment came not only from Banishevsky, but also from her children and other neighborhood kids, culminating in Sylvia's tragic death on October 26, 1965. Banishevsky served less than 20 years in prison, while the others arrested for the crime were handed much shorter sentences.
And to know that you're responsible for taking someone's life is real hard to live with.
Banishevsky died 5 years later.
The crimes of Jerry Brutus. Born in Webster, South Dakota in 1939, Jerry Brutus developed a fetish for women's shoes at a very young age. As he grew older, this obsession manifested in the form of attacking women, only to steal their shoes and keep them for himself.
Jerry Brutus was married. There was nothing really that made him stand out. But yet behind closed doors, he was into a variety of fetishes, and yet nobody would ever know because he was doing it within the privacy of his own home.
When the bodies of Linda Saley and Karen Sprinker, 2 young Oregon women, were discovered in the Long Tom River in 1969, police were quick to identify similarities in their deaths. They questioned students at the nearby Oregon State University and were led to Brutus, who later confessed to the murders in gory detail.
Jerry took pictures of his victims in select clothing.
Brutus opted for a guilty plea and was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. He died of liver cancer in 2006 while incarcerated. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. In February 2005, Dennis Rader, a family man and local church leader in Wichita, Kansas, was arrested and charged with the murders of 10 people.
He was married. He was relatively young. He was 28 years old, relatively handsome. So he should have everything going for him.
Between 1974 and 1991, Rader had stalked most of his victims to their homes, where they were bound, tortured, and then killed. He derived his own nickname, the BTK Killer, from this method. Rader stopped his spree after 1991, only to begin sending taunting letters to police and media houses a little over a decade later.
BTK sent a letter to the office claiming responsibility for killing Vicki Wegerle in 1986. He enclosed a copy of her driver's license.
He may have gotten away with the crimes, if not for a floppy disk he sent to the police, which was traced back to him.
Police were able to find metadata from a deleted document that contained the name of his church and the first name, Dennis.
Rader pleaded guilty to the killings and was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms. John Haig's life of crimes. Dubbed the acid bath murderer, John George Haig was a British serial killer who was active between 1944 and 1949. Haig began his life of crime selling fraudulent stocks under a false identity.
Almost as soon as he left school, he began the life of a petty crook and swindler.
He was eventually caught and served multiple prison terms for his scams. After leaving prison in 1943, Haig started targeting wealthy individuals and killing them for their money. He would then dissolve the bodies in sulfuric acid, believing it would leave no trace of the crime.
This is what we come now to see as the quintessential image of the acid bath killer in practice.
Haig claimed 5 lives in this manner without getting caught, but his 6th victim would prove to be his downfall. At his trial, Haig pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, but regardless, he was convicted and executed by hanging.
Nobody was fooled by these claims of drinking blood and forests of crucifixes and things like that. It had clearly been a ploy.
The disappearance of the Sauter children. George and Jenny Sauter, alongside 9 of their 10 children, were asleep on Christmas Eve 1945 when their Fayetteville, West Virginia house caught fire. The couple managed to escape with 4 of the children, but all attempts to rescue the other 5 trapped upstairs proved futile.
And the 5 of them shared 2 bedrooms between them, both rooms upstairs.
The family initially believed all 5 children died in the fire, only to find no remains of them in the rubble.
Authorities scavenged the ashes of the fire looking for the remains of the 5 missing Sauter children, but nothing was found, and they were presumed dead due to the fire.
Despite multiple theories and investigations at the state and federal levels, the case turned up no new leads and eventually grew cold.
Soon after the fire, George and Jenny began to suspect their children were not dead, but instead kidnapped, believing the fire was deliberately set as a diversion.
For decades, the Sauter family kept up a billboard at the site offering a $5,000 reward for any information about the disappearance. It was, however, taken down after Jenny's death in 1989. The Cleveland Torso Murders.
It's one of the darkest chapters in Cleveland history.
Town was in fear.
And during that time, a serial killer stalked this city.
In the 1930s, a serial killer reigned terror in Cleveland, Ohio, murdering and dismembering at least 12 people in the span of 4 years. The remains of these individuals were found scattered around the city, with most of them having died from decapitation. Of the 12 known victims, only 2 were positively identified as Edward Andrasey and Florence Polillo.
But all of the victims had one thing in common.
People who would not be missed, people who had no identity.
A third victim was thought to be a woman named Rose Wallace, but her identity was never confirmed. The investigation into the murders, which was the largest in Cleveland history, turned up 2 suspects, but no charges stuck.
I'm 99% sure we pegged him.
And the belief that this face, this man, is Cleveland's torso killer.
Francis Edward Sweeney. Nothing points away from him.
Today, the identity of the torso murderer remains unknown. The Hunts of Robert Hansen. Growing up in Iowa, Robert Hansen was a shy loner who spent his free time hunting. After serving multiple jail sentences for petty theft, he moved to Anchorage, Alaska, where he settled with his family.
And opened a bakery. It was a huge success. He had a wife and children, and except for his stutter, he fit in completely.
While there, Hansen began abducting young women to his home at gunpoint and assaulting them. With his private plane, he flew some of these women out into the wild, where he hunted them like prey before taking their lives.
His habit was to toy with his prey before he made the kill.
In total, Hansen killed at least 17 women. With the help of one of his victims who escaped, police were able to nail Hansen in 1983 and succeeded in sending him to prison.
Robert Hansen was convicted of murdering 4 women and sentenced to 461 years plus life with no chance of parole.
He died in 2014 of natural causes. The murder of John Price. In 2001, Catherine Knight became the first woman in Australian history to be sentenced to life imprisonment without parole.
But what was most surprising was when you did see her, just how terribly ordinary she looked. She could have been a librarian.
Her crime was the gruesome murder of her romantic partner, John Price. Price had kicked Knight out of his house after years of living together, during which she was reportedly violent towards him.
His children say that there were scars on his body from where she'd stabbed him and hit him.
On the night of February 29, 2000, Knight returned to Price's house and stabbed him repeatedly before doing and planning far more heinous actions.
I just couldn't believe that one human being, either male or female, of our species could carry out such a calculated offence.
Police, responding to a call from Price's neighbor and co-worker, found Knight comatose in the house and placed her under arrest. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist. Around 1:24 a.m. on March 18, 1990, guards at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, Massachusetts, buzzed in two men who appeared to be police officers. Once inside, the men subdued the guards and set about on what would become one of the largest museum heists in history.
They handcuffed them and they wrapped duct tape around their eyes and they locked them up in the basement.
Over the next hour, the robbers stole 13 works of art worth over $500 million, leaving empty frames hanging in their place. The FBI jumped on the case immediately, but their investigation stalled due to a lack of physical evidence at the crime scene.
Those thieves were careful to cover their tracks. They went back to the security area and made sure they grabbed the video surveillance tape.
The heist remains unsolved to this day, but one popular theory is that it was orchestrated by the Boston Mafia.
As federal investigators listened to their informants and wiretaps, they heard Merlino talk about trying to return 2 of the stolen pieces.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. The disappearance of Dorothy Jane Scott. Dorothy Jane Scott was a 32-year-old single mother who was working as a retail store secretary in California when she disappeared in 1980.
Dorothy was going to go get the car and bring it around.
Before she got to the car, there was somebody there already waiting for her.
In the months leading up to the incident, Scott had received multiple calls from an anonymous man who claimed to love her, but also threatened her life.
What was your reaction when you were told the specifics of what the caller said?
That just almost put the final nail in the coffin.
Those threats were ostensibly made manifest on May 28th when Scott was abducted in her own car after driving a co-worker to the hospital. Her car was later abandoned and set on fire in an alley, where it was found the next day.
The car being set on fire, it's like, wow.
Scott, however, remained missing until 4 years later, when her burnt remains were discovered by a construction worker.
Do you know of any other crazy stories? Let us know in the comments below.
I can see that there's an emotional coldness about it.